If you have stress in your life, it's probably impacting your cortisol levels. But if you don't know what your levels really are, you could end up choosing the wrong treatment strategies. Keep watching, because in this video, I'm going to explain why standard cortisol testing just doesn't cut it and which tests to use instead. Cortisol is king. Cortisol is a bully. Cortisol always wins a game of biochemical tug-of-war. That's because cortisol's main job is to help you survive. Sometimes it's useful to think of it as your frenemy, because when cortisol is balanced and being produced at appropriate times and amounts, it's your friend. It activates your immune system, quenches acute inflammation, and sends fuel to your cells. Even though cortisol has been demonized in recent years, it is absolutely essential for your health and well-being. But when cortisol is dysfunctional, when your body's producing too much, too little, or the wrong amount at the wrong time of day, it creates chaos. Here's just a small sampling of symptoms that are often rooted in cortisol problems. Fatigue, both chronic and acute crashes. Anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. Brain fog, poor focus, and memory problems. Trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Weight gain or weight loss resistance. Hair loss or thinning. Digestive problems like constipation or diarrhea. Hormonal imbalances that trigger menstrual cycle disruption, infertility, hot flashes, and low libido. Why does cortisol go off the rails, leading to all kinds of problems like the ones I just mentioned? The short answer is stress. But don't scroll away just yet, because stress isn't just between your ears. It's not the sum of your life experiences and current situation, though both of those things can contribute to stress. Stress is mental, emotional, and physical, and the body treats all stress the same, as a threat to survival. So yes, if you're going through a divorce, your brain will signal for more stress hormones like cortisol to be produced by the adrenal glands, specifically via the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, most often called the HPA axis. But this same pathway is triggered when your body is under chronic physical stress. For example, if you have an autoimmune disease, if you're pre-diabetic, or if you don't get enough exercise. While these things have little to do with your emotions or your thoughts, they absolutely set off your chronic stress response and cause cortisol dysfunction. This is why you might wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding and mind racing, even if you're not feeling stressed. It could be why you've been unable to lose that 20 pounds, even though you changed your diet and are working out. It's probably impacting your brain power, making you feel forgetful or foggy or unfocused. But the only way to know for sure is to take an accurate, comprehensive cortisol test. You can't rely on symptoms alone because they overlap. I know it's annoying, but I've seen folks with chronic fatigue who turn out to have high cortisol and folks with the same symptom but who have low cortisol. Same goes for weight gain, hair loss, and panic attacks. Imagine if someone with weight loss resistance assumed that they had low cortisol, even though it was actually elevated, and started taking supplements to raise it, things like adrenal glandulars, licorice root, or Panax ginseng. I see it all the time, and I can tell you that it's very possible to make things worse if you don't really know what your cortisol is doing. So, what is the best test for your cortisol levels, and why do the rest fall short? Well, if you're lucky enough to have a doctor who will test your cortisol levels, they will most likely order a blood test for cortisol. This is the least helpful cortisol test for a couple of reasons. First, it only measures free cortisol, and free cortisol rises and falls significantly depending on your sleep-wake cycle. Free cortisol starts out relatively low when you first wake up, then rises sharply, and then tails off slowly over the course of the day to become low again in the evening. A single blood test at a random time of day does not take any of this into account and will most likely come back as normal, unless you have a rare and complicated disease like Addison's or Cushing's. While it's good to rule out these conditions, getting a normal test result for cortisol when you're definitely not feeling normal can be discouraging, frustrating, and it can leave you without a solid plan for addressing your symptoms. And a single normal cortisol blood test does not necessarily mean that your cortisol is normal. I can promise you that. You might be thinking, Dr. Kate, I know all about the free cortisol curve because I did a salivary cortisol test, so I know for sure that my cortisol is high or low. Well, you'd be right in that you know if your free cortisol is high or low, but what about your overall cortisol production? A salivary test is like a snapshot. It measures your levels of free cortisol at the moment you spit into that vial. And it's great that most salivary tests utilize multiple timed collections to establish your cortisol pattern. This can be very useful. But what about all of the cortisol that your body is breaking down in your tissues? The cortisol that is being metabolized or cleared out of the bloodstream? That doesn't get measured on a saliva test. And neither does free cortisone, which is inactivated cortisol. Assessing your cortisol via saliva is like taking 4 to 6 photographs of a film screen while it's playing and expecting to understand the whole plot of the movie. The best way to measure all of these factors, free cortisol and its daily rhythm, inactivated free cortisone, and a total or metabolized cortisol production, is via urine, specifically via the DUTCH Adrenal test. Let me explain. When the adrenal glands make cortisol, it is released into the bloodstream as free cortisol. And like we talked about, free cortisol levels rise and fall at different parts of the day and night. But free cortisol can also be interconverted to free cortisone. And a lot of factors impact how much free cortisol versus free cortisone your body has hanging around. Free cortisol can also be metabolized or cleared out of the body via the urine. Metabolized cortisol is often a good measurement of total cortisol production, depending on something called your cortisol clearance rate. This is another crucial cortisol measurement that you get with dried urine testing. When you compare how much cortisol has been metabolized or cleared to the amount of free cortisol and cortisone in your body, you get the cortisol clearance rate, which you can see on the DUTCH test as a slider bar. If the slider bar is further to the right, it means cortisol clearance is happening faster. If it's further to the left, it means the clearance rate is lower or happening more slowly. Many things can cause a slow cortisol clearance rate, including low ferritin, hypothyroidism, liver disease, and mitochondrial dysfunction. What does this mean for free cortisol levels? Well, if cortisol isn't being metabolized or cleared fast enough, you may see higher free cortisol levels, even if your total cortisol production is low. And you can still have the same symptoms of too much cortisol production due to free cortisol levels being elevated. But if you assume your overall cortisol levels are high and you start trying to lower them, you could create more problems than you solve. This is why I always recommend the DUTCH test when measuring cortisol levels. There's just too much that you can miss with a blood or saliva test, because those tests don't take into account factors like cortisone, metabolized cortisol, and cortisol clearance. The accuracy, thoroughness, and precision of the DUTCH adrenal test make it the best option because it not only gives you the most data, but that data is actionable and leads to the best outcomes over and over again. The good news is that we help people all over the world get access to the DUTCH test for cortisol with my Cortisol Confidence Fast Track. And as part of the testing bundle, I'll walk you through your results line by line and recommend diet and lifestyle strategies as well as practitioner-grade supplements that fit your unique needs. If you're ready to finally get some answers about your cortisol, ones that will actually move the needle and help you feel like yourself again, I'd strongly recommend the Cortisol Confidence Fast Track. I'll put a link in the video description so that you can learn more and get signed up for the best, most comprehensive, most actionable cortisol test right now. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing to my channel. And be sure to check out the video description for that link to more info about ordering your cortisol test. We do ship internationally, so keep that in mind. I think that about wraps it up for now. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.